I'm Chris Terranova, and this is the Generational Exchange. 4 generations, 1 conversation. The business world is a tapestry woven from different threads. The experience of seasoned veterans, the tech-savvy energy of the younger generation, and everything in between. In this podcast, we'll unravel those threads, exploring the unique perspective from panelists in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s on today's business challenges. By bringing together these unique voices, we hope to spark new ideas, bridge the generation gap, and equip listeners with a well-rounded approach to navigating the ever-evolving business landscape. All right. Once again, we have the full panel here. It's very exciting. Representing, I'm going to go in a different order today, guys, because I'm crazy like that. Representing the 60s, we have Mark Russell. Just because you're the oldest doesn't mean you have to go last. Welcome back, my friend.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone.
There you go. And representing the 30s, we have Rhett Suchu. Welcome back, sir.
Hello.
And as always, our little man on the prairie, we have Jeremy Davidson, who is representing the 40s and all homesteaders nationwide. Good evening, my friend.
Hello, hello.
All right. So, and I'm Chris Terranova, I guess I should say that. I am representing the 50s. So welcome to the show, the Generational Exchange. Today, our topic is going to be how to position for a promotion, what works, what doesn't, and what you can do to improve your chances, and also maybe some things you may not want to do when it comes to being promoted. So let's start the exchange. All right, so let's get into it. Whether this is your first promotion or the latest in a long line of promotions, we all have that next step in mind most of the time, and that's to climb up the ladder. But that path can be foggy, it can be filled with helpful steps, hidden hazards, and knowing what to do and not to do, and whether you should even take a promotion, can make the difference between moving forward or getting stuck. So as you guys know, if you've listened to the podcast, I'm a big fan of lists. So this episode has 7 things to do to help you ensure your position correctly for that next promotion. 7. 5 things not to do so you don't minimize your chances, and even a quick look at whether you should take a promotion. Just because it's presented, it doesn't mean you should always take it. But let's start with the things that you could do to better position yourself. We've got 7 of those. We're going to start. They're in no particular order. The first 2 we found on Vault Online, and they focus on making a shift in your mindset. So the first one is looking at it like a career, not a job. Don't just get stuck in that daily grind. Take control of your career advancements by setting long-term goals and actively working towards them. So all of us have experience in being promoted, moving around, and offering promotions. Mark, maybe starting with you, can you talk a little bit about kind of looking at this as a career and not a job if you're wanting to move forward?
Yeah, it's, the interesting dynamic is, when people are entering the workforce, what we find is you've always kind of been in little segments, the top of the heap, right? You were the senior in high school, you were the senior in college, you were, the high achiever. And then all of a sudden you get into the workforce and you're surrounded by all high achievers for the most part, right? So all of a sudden that competition pool really gets in things. And so that's where you can't expect every year, every 2 years, you're going to get back to the top of the heap, because you're playing against veterans that have 10, 20, maybe even 30 years experience. And from that perspective, so I think number 1 is set those long-term strategic goals, understand what it is you have to do, communicate. And we'll talk a lot tonight, all of us will, about communicating with your manager, right? Let them understand these are my goals. How can you help me, achieve these goals? And at the same time, take to heart their feedback, because ultimately they are going to be the ones making, some of those final decisions along with their other peers, if it be at the director level, the VP level, whatever the case is. And the last thing we always try and advocate for is have your own internal board of directors. Have those 3 or 4 trusted allies that you really can count on, that are going to give you, when you need it, the tough love. They're going to give you the encouragement, from that perspective, so you can keep your goals on track.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and it kind of stacks on some of our previous episodes. So, for those of you listening, if you haven't listened to our earlier episodes, we have a whole episode on mentoring, a whole episode on imposter syndrome, right? And it ties into some of these things, keeping yourself on track. A lot of the things that Mark said resonate throughout kind of the through line of our podcast. So, make sure you go back and listen to those earlier episodes. Rhett, do you have anything you want to add to that from your perspective?
Yeah, when I kind of looked at this point, one of the first things I thought about was career paths, right? And we get into those all the time as far as creating a career path for your team, but also look at it as far as creating a career path for yourself. You know, potentially what you want to avoid here is taking positions that don't suit you or get you going in a direction that maybe wasn't along that career path, right? And maybe you take a promotion too soon and you really wanted a different promotion, but that team wasn't ready for it. A year later, you're too busy with your other team. You can't take that other promotion, right? You can't go along that career path that you potentially wanted and may suit your skill set better. So I think it's important to, like this is saying, not just kind of nose to the grindstone, get into it and not be thinking about, okay, 5 years, right? Where do I want to be, or what industry do I maybe want to be in? So, you know, one of the things that I always do when I'm thinking about career, not job, right, is maybe I look at a position that I would like to have in X amount of years. Okay, what type of degree does that usually have? What types of certifications does it have?
Right.
Kind of look to the future as far as that goes. And then again, we've talked about not being too strict in how you build that out, right? Don't be like, June 4th, I'm doing this. And then all of a sudden it's June 10th. You're like, the whole plan's ruined. We're not going anywhere, right? But get a sense of where you want to go future wise.
Yeah, you want to kind of put things in a flexible container, right? Not so much a hard-sided box, because as we all have experienced, things can change, right? So I think those are all good points of, it's kind of like putting guardrails up on your career, right? But there's room to move to either side.
Right.
I think
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Rhett's a phenomenal example of that. Rhett, when you graduated there with your MBA, what role did you step into? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, I was a implementation project manager.
And what role did you have 30 days later?
I think I was lead at that point, lead IPM for the West or California.
We had an opportunity there to jump into something new, and it wasn't necessarily what you jumped into or signed up for when you came on board, but
No.
you were super open about where you wanted to be,
Right.
when you came on board. So that was resonating around in the back of the head, right? Like, hey, he's got an interest here. Let's see if he can step up to the plate. But no, I just cracked up when I saw that one. Don't be too tied to your career ladder, right?
Yeah, actually, and I spoke incorrectly. I was actually a project manager for you when I first came on. I was working on, the milestones and other things that we were working on, right? So I wasn't even necessarily like going for IPM or customer success, right? So yeah, for sure.
Well, that brings up a good point. I mention this often, not that I'm a big fan of anybody, but, I do likes me some Oprah. And Oprah was interviewing Dr. Phil. And for those of you who don't know, she gave Dr. Phil his start in TV. He was a lawyer for her at one point, and, they kind of turned it into a guest spot on her show, and then it turned into an episodes, and then it turned into a whole series. But she was talking to him one time, and he said, the thing I think that frustrates me the most is people always say, I'm lucky. I'm lucky that I knew Oprah. I'm lucky. And she said, I define luck as being ready for an opportunity when it presents itself, right? And that, what you just said, is the epitome of being lucky, because I'm sure there's a lot of people like, oh, Rhett's lucky. He's, a young man and he's moved through his career. Well, luck is recognizing opportunity when it comes, and not always on that ladder that you expected, right?
Mm-hmm.
100%.
Right.
He could have raised his hand and said, no, I want to stay in this project manager role, right?
Well, and we're going to talk about when the right time is to do that too, a little farther down, because there are going to be times when you should consider, is this the right move, right? But having that framework, like Rhett said, I think really gives you a sense of where you're going with it. Okay, let's move on to number 2. And again, we've talked about this in an earlier podcast. It was in the imposter syndrome one, but I think it's really important because it comes up here, is track your wins, Track your successes, right? Your accomplishments can be your currency. Regularly document your successes to build a strong case for your value when promotion opportunities arise, right? It also helps with imposter syndrome because if you've got some negative language or negative thoughts in your head, having that list of successes will help reinforce that, okay, I'm good enough, I'm strong enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. So, along those lines, Jeremy, any thoughts on that one?
Oh yeah, the this one I kind of jumped up and down with because we've been focusing on it as I've been in my own career job search right now. In the moment, I've also been helping and partnering with folks that are also interviewing and putting their resume out there and looking for new opportunities. And one of the things that we're talking over and over and over again is, do you have the right data points on your resume? Right? Do you know what those wins were? And a lot of folks don't. We used to talk about this on our team meetings. I don't know, Red, if you remember. I had this oddball practice. I pulled everybody together and said, "Hey guys, we're having resume building days."
Yep. Yeah.
I don't know if the HR department knows that I did that still, but we had so much fun. We had so much fun because what we did, we pulled everybody's numbers.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
What's your portfolio value? What's your retention rate? What's your how many accounts have you worked with? What's your time to onboard numbers? Was that plus or minus kind of the group average? And we had everybody plug that stuff in because you forget, the big wins that you have in February, March, April. By the time you get to November, December, poof, that stuff's out of your head because you've had some wins hopefully in August, September, October, and those ones are top of mind. But the ability to look back and be able to quantify, and I know this is the later point as well, but be able to quantify your impact either to your customers or to your team, to your leadership group in particular, right, is 100% invaluable. And also being able to capture that for your own benefit, right? If you happen to go, maybe you're ready for a more senior role and there isn't one available in your company and you have to go look outside the company for an opportunity. You want to know what those numbers were, what that value was that you provided back. So I think starting early in your career and setting up that cadence of kind of keeping track. What are things that went really well? What are things, maybe that you had some challenges with, but you learned from and you grew from? Having that little journal or diary, so to speak, as you kind of move along in your career, I think is it will put you light years ahead of your peer group. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, super smart. Rhett, Mark, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, Jeremy, I do remember that. It was really cool. I mean, you could come up with awesome stats like, hey, do you know that you've onboarded $1.4 million worth of customers this year? They're like, really? Like, wow. It's like, yeah, and you've processed 1,500 cases, and like, all those numbers were really nice for their resumes, for their confidence, for getting promoted like this, right? All of those, when you put some substance to it, can really mean a lot. The other thing I would say here for people is that something that I like to do is just write things down as I kind of realize that I'm accomplishing them, right? So if you just finished a big project, write it down somewhere. If you have like hey, next time I update my resume, these are things I want to add to it. Just write down whatever the project was, because in a month you're going to forget that one, or, you might not remember it. And so I like to try and write it down when it's fresh. And then when I go to redo my resume, if I need to, I have a big stack of 70 things that I wrote down and I can pick and choose. So.
Oh, it's a great point. I mean, as several of us are kind of job searching right now. I think when I was going to update my resume, I couldn't remember a lot of the true action points, right? Which is what they want to see. They want to see the numbers. They want to see you raise the CSAT, or you dropped expenses, or you saved the customer. And, to both of your points, if you don't do that as you go, it starts to kind of congeal into a big blob, and pulling it apart can be harder, especially if you're working on bigger tasks, bigger projects. Some of that can get lost. So I think those are great points. All right, let's move on. The next 2 points come from Financial Management Online, and they focus on building a strategy. So the first one is play the long game, right? Forget about waiting for that perfect promotion to fall into your lap. Be proactive. Communicate your desire for new challenges and growth to your manager early on. And again, we've talked about that as part of mentoring, part of growth. But Jeremy, you have any thoughts on kind of that, playing that long game?
Yeah, I think this feeds a bit into the last one, right? In terms of having conversations with your manager, with your leadership about where you want to be, what you want to be doing, and how do you get there. Building out a career ladder, right? Like maybe you came on board more of an entry level position, associate such and such. How do I move from associate customer success manager to customer success manager? How do I move from CSM to senior CSM? Is there value for me moving to a senior CSM versus a CSM lead role, right? And I think having those conversations and understanding the nuances there, right? Is senior higher than lead? Maybe at your company, maybe not. It could be a lead role is kind of positioning you for more of a management or a leadership position, where a senior role puts you in front of the largest, most strategic enterprise accounts, right? If you're watching the video, I've got a shadow because my 150-pound dog just stepped in front of the light. But I do think
Dog or horse?
Yes.
he's a little bit of a combo. The joys of live recording, right? But I do think laying out that career ladder makes a big difference in understanding how things kind of play cross departmentally, understanding how the company's growing, what the focus points for the company are. I actually wanted to toss it over to Chris really quick. One of the things that I carried with me beyond our time working together was the idea of building cross-functional or cross-departmental career ladders, particularly in a startup phase or a high-growth environment. I just thought that was a phenomenal thing that we did as we grew out customer operations at the company that went from 10 to 500, 600 people. But being able to see opportunities in different departments based on your skill set. And I know this is the later on talking point of how do you leverage what's important to you in your career growth. But I don't think there's a lot of teams that have done that. I've not run across it outside of kind of our little core group here in my career. But for any leadership folks that are looking, I think it provided some really good insight for people on our teams as they were looking to kind of explore what career meant for them, where they wanted to be. But also when push came to shove, and maybe there was a right sizing within a department, right, where a couple of headcount needed to be removed. We knew what was available in different departments, what skill sets were required, what certifications might be required, and we're able to offer folks some of those lateral transfer opportunities that might not have otherwise been available. And Chris, you kind of helped build that out along with the mantra of not becoming, and I'm not going to phrase this correctly, but it always stuck with me, of not becoming such a crucial linchpin that you can't afford to take that promotion or can't afford to switch to that other team. I'm sure you phrased it better than I did, but it's resonated with me for like the last decade. You can't make yourself indispensable, right?
Well, it's called a CLM, right? I got almost stuck in that a while back in my career. CLM is a career limiting move where you're so integral to that role that no one can see you doing anything else ever, right? So they're not going to consider you for a promotion. They're not going to think of you going to another department because only Jeremy could do this job. No one else can do it ever, right? And I had that happen to me where I was getting promoted and the group that I was working for went, yeah, no, we're not going to give him up and he doesn't get the promotion. And we had to negotiate a 6-month transition. It ended up being closer to a year where I was basically straddling both jobs because I was so successful at what I was doing. I hadn't thought outside of what I would do next, right? And so when this opportunity came up, I was almost stuck. So it is one of those things you have to think about. But knowing what's happening outside of your ecosystem, right, also gives you insight into what other departments are doing. It helps you better prepare for your job anyway. So don't be afraid to ask your manager. If your manager doesn't know, they can probably connect you with someone who does, or find that person in another department, ask them what they do. It's okay. When we talk about, we're going to talk a little later about being a team player and being a part of a community, getting to know those people in other areas, it can give you an insight into a way to move that may not just be straight up. It might be lateral. There might be other ways to go. So I think those are really good points. Mark, anything else to add to that one?
Yeah, I think the other element is, remember that leadership is going to look at things as sustained performance. One good year, one good, outcome doesn't really mean that you can sustain that performance throughout. So, just don't, like, I came from the business development and sales world. One good sales year, okay, that's great, but can you do that 3 or 4 years in a row? So again, I think that's just a little grounding, and a good manager will have that conversation with someone.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, the fourth thing is show, don't tell. And we've talked about this a lot. And, Jeremy and Brett, we've gotten all this advice as well from Mark over the years. But, don't just tell your manager you deserve a promotion. Demonstrate your value through concrete results and by taking initiative on projects that showcase your skills. I would also say, too, documenting those wins, like we said earlier, and being able to say, I don't get promoted just because I'm me, because I've been here for 5 years. Show them why you deserve that promotion, and having that documentation and those results can really help with that. Mark, expand on that if you could.
Yeah, so I think it's about demonstrating the competencies of the role that you want. So just don't say, I want to be a manager, but I need to act like a manager. I need to act like a manager of managers, or a director, or a VP over an entire organization. Demonstrate that you're willing to hold others accountable. Because that's one of the things in management. Just because you're given a title doesn't mean people are automatically going to respect that. And I think the other element is to make sure that you are always giving more credit than what you take in. Make sure that the people that have really helped contribute to any team success, any, like a big sales win, hey, it's not just me. There's 17 other people here that really deserve all the credit. I just happen to quarterback and coordinate a lot of these efforts.
That's a great point. Red, anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I'd say, to echo Mark, kind of being that person or that position that you want to be before you're there, right? And you mentioned this in a previous episode. When you met me, I came in showing you that I was prepared for that kind of promotion and next role, right? I was dressed well, I acted professionally, I was asking all the questions, I was, almost trying to push that thought into your head of like, oh, this guy's thinking to the next level, right? No, he dresses well, and yeah, he could probably manage a few people, right? It's almost self-manifestation in a way, a lot of times. And I'd say, other ways you can do this before you're offered that position is if you're on like a team, right? If you're on a team of customer success managers, be really helpful to your teammates, right? Be offering advice, be helping them, and making sure that your supervisor is seeing that, because they're going to naturally take that as, oh, they're ready to be able to help people, right? They're taking those first steps on being the leader. I'm not having to ask them. They're going ahead and doing it. Now all this with, don't work 80 hours and overwork yourself and everything else, right? But to the degree that you want to get promoted, you might have to do that little bit extra. For myself, another thing here is I'm always aiming, and Mark kind of said this, I'm always aiming almost for others to show that recognition of what I'm doing, rather than me trying to get on a megaphone and say how great I am, right? Like, I want to hear examples from Jeremy and stuff on like what we just talked about. Hey, this guy, when I offered him the position, he jumped into it, he was ready for it. Or, with this really tough project, and he was the first one to go in and last one to come out as far as working on it. So, yeah, a lot of show, don't tell you can do without necessarily having a promotion already set up or anything like that. So along that career path, career building too.
No, I think that's right. And the next three that we're going to talk about, we've talked a lot about these in various ways, but I think they all tie in together. These come from our friends at Forbes, and they focus on enhancing your personal qualities. So the first one is be self-motivated, right? Internal drive is the key. Set achievable goals for yourself. Stay positive with a gratitude practice. If you need help with that, go back and listen to our Imposter Syndrome podcast, and hold yourself accountable to keep your career moving forward. I think on this one, this is one of those ones that sounds really easy, but is a little trickier than it looks. Rhett, can you speak to that at all?
Yeah. So, I want to start with, you will largely be responsible for your promotions, right? A lot of this is going to hinge on you being able to keep yourself motivated, keep yourself going in the right direction. Like we spoke earlier, avoiding going down career paths that maybe get you pigeonholed or where you become the linchpin. And so what you have to do is find a way to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success, that will allow you to keep pushing. So like our episode on, work-life balance, right? And having activities outside of work that allow you to tackle your next day just as tough as you did that day. So setting achievable goals, being, reliable and being able to show up. So a few key things there. It's a bit more of a, just make sure you're doing what you're doing to keep yourself successful, if that makes sense, and be prepared.
Yeah, I think that's right. The next one is being a team player, right? Be a positive force, whether it's in the office, it's virtual. Contribute to a collaborative environment by participating in activities and encouraging teamwork among your colleagues. You can be volunteering as a group, working together. Mark, I know you've talked about this a lot, about being a team player, but add a little bit more to that if you would.
Yeah, so as they say, there's no I in team, from that perspective. So, but I think what happens is, like in my experiences when I was with large companies, obviously you had a lot of support groups, yet they didn't provide everything. So what I tried to do was say, where can I help fill in the gaps for the betterment of the team, for the betterment of myself? Because if I'm being successful, then others are hopefully will be successful. And what can I learn from others? So that's again where I use kind of that little internal board of directors, where I knew which 4 or 5 people I could rely on to say, hey, I've got this wacky idea. Is there something here that I should start to build out? And then we can all contribute. We were collaborating before. They were all great collaboration tools, but literally those were the things. And then, be able to expand that out, right? Because as you meet people at national meetings, now all of a sudden, well, I may be in Minneapolis, but I now have a BFF in LA and Chicago and Miami. So, or even Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So, literally, I think it's just looking to say, where can I help fill in gaps based on my experiences? That way people can learn, and that rising tide, all boats will go.
That's true. And tying into that is the last one, which is a load lifter, right? True leadership goes beyond individual achievement. Become a valuable asset to your team by helping others and lightening their burdens. This not only demonstrates your willingness to go the extra mile, but also shows you're ready for increased responsibility or promotions. And Jeremy, you and I have talked about this a lot over the years, right? I think we leaned on each other a lot. We leaned on our teams a lot. This was certainly not, kind of everything being held up by one person. Talk a little bit about your experience with that and how that really does help kind of set you up for success.
Well, I think we talked a little bit about, oh gosh, what was that kids cartoon, the robots, see a need, fill a need, right?
Bob the Builder.
Yeah, that's right. We oftentimes we really want our employees, our folks, to be able to raise their hand and say, hey, I need help. I've got too many balls in the air. I'm struggling with a problem. I'm X, Y, and Z, right? I need some help. And the flip side of that is we want folks on the team that can raise their hand and say, hey, I got your back. I can step in and I can help with this. It could be coaching and mentoring. It could be providing an ear for some frustration venting. It could be a myriad of things. Could be helping train and set up onboarding for new employees. jumping into a tricky situation with a customer. And I think that goes up as well. I think there's an opportunity to be able to kind of coach up, um, put on your boss's hat for the day and say, try to put yourself in their shoes and say, hey, what's important from a leadership position in this department? What are our look fors? What's important to my boss? What's important to my boss's boss? And generally that's going to revolve around some number, right? Either customer satisfaction, it could be revenue based, it could be sales quotas. It completely depends on what position you're in, what team you're on. But I guarantee you there is some number that's part of your organization, part of your business that you directly contribute to, that you directly impact. And again, it could be, the artificial now. It could be customer sat, CSAT. It could be NPS. It could be, are your customers referenceable? It could be time to onboard. It could be time to launch, time to revenue. It could be a million different things, but there is a number in that business, I guarantee you, that you're responsible for. And that folds up, right? So your boss's boss, ultimately they're responsible for the growth, the maintenance, the achievement of a certain number in that business. And I think if you can put that hat on and understand that, it's not just the 25 customers that you're partnering with today that you're trying to get onboarded, right? It's the amount of time it takes to get them onboarded. And really, why is that important to the business, right? Well, that's time to revenue, right? The shorter they can get up and running with the product, with the widget, whatever it is, the quicker they can be realizing value from that. Or the quicker the company can be recognizing revenue from that. There is an underlying motive to all of those different KPIs and metrics that you have. And I think really stepping up and understanding that, knowing what the look fors are, and helping feed that up, a good way to phrase that would be, in my role, what could I do that makes my boss look better, right? Certainly no surprises, but understanding what those stressors are. How do I prove out the value for my, $3.4 million team? What value is that spend contributing to the business? As an individual contributor, if I understand that, if I go into that with that mindset, I'm already light years ahead, right? So I don't know, that would be my two take there, is that you can, look around within your team, within your department, within other teams. And if you see an opportunity to step in and help, do it. Don't wait for the promotion, do it. And if you have the opportunity to take a step back and look at the bigger picture for the business, do that as well. Guarantee you, it won't be wasted time.
No, I think those are great points. Mark, anything to add to that?
I think two things. Number one, as Jeremy had said, look for those operational efficiency improvements. And there were times, Chris, from our early life together, it was almost as if, okay, if the account management team could spend 10 extra minutes a week doing this, it will save the client services team an hour and a half. Right. So that became kind of a no-brainer, right? Because you put yourself into that true mindset of, you want to take one for the team because there's a bigger picture than just yourselves. I know there are opportunities that, when you're in a position to promote people, right? Who are the ones that were already doing that job versus waiting for the title before they would demonstrate, those responsibilities. So I think those are just a couple of real quick things to, just keep in mind is, how are you impacting others in the organization? And again, as I've mentioned earlier, if you're already doing the job, it makes it a lot easier for people to have confidence, say, I'm going to move them into this next, roll up.
No, I think that's right. And I think on all of those points, right? I mean, I think we've given you a good framework. There's going to be more, there's going to be others, but I think this gives you a good template, especially if this is your first time being promoted or if you've been passed up for a promotion. These are some ways to kind of reflect and look at, what you can do versus what you're doing, and see if there's some changes you can make. All right, great discussion. We've talked through several ways to improve your chances. Now let's talk about some ways that, you might weaken your chances for a promotion. I found a great list on monster.com that really speaks to how you can be sabotaging your chances, and you may not even know you're doing it. The first one is don't assume silence speaks volume. And what that means is even if you're a top performer, speak up, champion for yourself. Your manager may not realize you have a desire for a promotion. Show your initiative and express your career goals. And just being a hard worker doesn't necessarily move you to the top of the list. That's why sometimes people who you know don't work as hard get ahead of you because they're better self-promoters, right? Mark, talk a little bit about that if you don't mind.
I think it's real simple is when you have those conversations with your manager, and some of the best advice I received from one of my managers is I said, I really want to be promoted. I want to take it to the next level. I want more responsibility. And I said, what are the things I have to do? And he was like, Mark, unfortunately, there's no magical checklist. There's a lot of intangibles, which I think were the 7 that we just discussed, right? That people will look at and evaluate on you. And I think a lot of times, even as we were interviewing for people, to come onto our team, I wanted a good cross-reference of my peer departments to interview because I want to make sure they all kind of, melded together. So again, I think here it's a lot of intangibles. There are a lot of things that you need to communicate, get that feedback, take to heart the feedback, and then be able to help move forward with your plan.
Oh, it's a great point. The next one is have confidence, not arrogance, right? Be clear about your interest in the promotion, but maintain a respectful tone. Avoid an overly confident or self-important attitude. It's a fine line sometimes, right? When we talk about being a self-champion and a self-promoter, it can cross over into arrogance if you're not too careful. Rhett, you and I have talked about this in the past. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, for me, this comes down to, a very corny phrase, but don't just talk the talk, walk the walk. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but start showing that you're ready for that role before that role even exists, or maybe you even need to create it through all the great work that you're doing. And have others talking about how great you're doing, or how, man, this guy, I bet he could be in a manager position or something like that. And that for me is always a great way to show that you're ready and be confident both internally and externally to your teammates and possible future employees if you get promoted before them, right? Without coming up with a megaphone again and saying, I'm so great, look at me, so that's what it comes down to for me.
No, I think that's right. The third thing is focus on value, not feelings, right? Appealing to your boss or your manager's emotions with personal problems or, hey, we're friends, is unprofessional, right? Instead, make sure you're always highlighting the value you bring and how the promotion will benefit the company, not just yourself. Jeremy, talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, for brevity's sake, I'll refer back to the earlier conversation around tracking your wins, right? Did you capture that value, that activity? Do you know what that number is, right? What we just chatted about. And are you stepping up into leadership opportunities as they pop up? And it doesn't have to be management, right? We kind of talked briefly about a CS structure that might be associate CSM, CSM, senior CSM, CSM lead, and then you get into manager, CSM director, CSM. It might be somebody's desire to get up into that senior role, but not necessarily be a people manager. Or doesn't want to deal with the enterprise level customers, but just loves people and talking about their career paths and KPIs and OKRs. I think stepping up, promotion doesn't necessarily mean jumping into a leadership role, right? But it could be increasing your responsibility levels, going after something that you maybe feel more passionate about. Maybe you started an implementation and you want to get in customer success because you like those ongoing relationships. But 100% agree. Focus on value, right? I don't know that it really matters. It shouldn't matter to those folks out there. One, how long you've been there, or two, that you're friends, or that you have a whole bunch of friends within the team, right? What value are you bringing to that number that you're responsible for? And if you can show that, if you can take that back, if you've been documenting it out, you'd be in a much, much, much better position moving forward.
No, I agree. I think that's right. I think it's always, focus on facts, not feelings, right? The next one is kind of another thing is to focus on merit, not tenure. Don't rely just on seniority to justify getting a promotion. Emphasize your skills and accomplishments that make you the strongest candidate. It isn't always who's been there the longest. Rhett, you've kind of moved up relatively quickly in your career, right? As I think most of us have. But talk a little bit about that, kind of from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, this one's really key for me and everyone kind of in my generation, right? Especially if you're trying to move up quicker than maybe the normal is. For me, I always think about it's not just about the quantity of the experience, it's about the quality of it, right? I've been fortunate enough to be put in positions where I've handled tasks and projects that have made me grow 5 years in one. Right. And so it's very important that you keep track of those, that you reference them, that you, like Jeremy was noting, show a way to show that quality of work, right? What's that key business term, phrase, or stat that you're going to reference that means something to someone who's 15 years your senior, right? That they learned when they were 40, but you learned when you were 30. All of that's going to be very important. So for me, it's especially for the younger generation, but to the point of not just relying on tenure, look at the quality of your experience, not just the quantity of it.
Well, that's a great point. It's a great point. All right. And the last one, which I think is also really important, is make sure it's the right fit, not just because it's upward, right? Don't chase a promotion just for the title. Ensure the new role aligns with your interests and career goals before applying. It's a two-way investment for you and the company. And I'm going to jump in on this one because there have been times where I've taken a promotion because it's been handed to me. Not because necessarily I wanted to do it, but I felt either obligated or I felt like I was getting some sort of visibility, but ultimately I wasn't as happy. And sometimes I took on too much just because it was offered to me, right? And I wasn't doing everything well. So I think, from my perspective, this is something that, we're talking about how to align yourself for a promotion, but this is almost like, what if somebody just comes and hands you one, or there's an opening and you're being suggested for it? Really think it through and make sure it's a good fit, right? If it's that stepping stone that we talked about, that's one thing, but just don't jump at it just because. Mark, I know you have some stats and some things on this one, but can you speak a little more to this?
Yeah, and I'm going to take this from the view of a manager, director, VP looking to promote people. So literally, Gallup will say that 70% of all promotions into management are done so for the wrong reasons. And my other hero, Patrick Lencioni, fully concurs with this, right? People are moved to management, and Rhett said it earlier. Someone has long tenure with the company. We want to retain them. We want to increase a person's compensation, or that person says, I need an increase in my compensation, or else I'm going to leave. So now we're going to promote you into management. The other fallacy at times is that a rock star performer doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a great manager or coach. Looking at the sporting world, some of the worst coaches were Hall of Fame players like Michael Jordan in basketball or Wayne Gretzky in hockey, right? They had that it factor that they knew how to do it with their teammates. They just couldn't get it motivated as a coach from that perspective. So I think those are some things that, managers and directors and VPs really need to be aware of and help coach their people. And then what is your motive for wanting to be in management? Because if it is for, hey, I've been here a long time or I want more money, those things really aren't the right motive. Are you willing to serve others? Are you willing to put others in front of yourself and be able to have them succeed? And, my heart does good because I look at a lot of the former teammates that I had when they were reporting to me, and many of them have far exceeded, my previous roles and everything into senior leadership roles. And to me, that's the greatest success of all.
And to be fair, some of our all-time best individual contributors have flat out said, nope, I don't want to be a people manager.
Yep. Yes.
In fact, I remember 10, 15 years ago, this amazing guy on the team, and we had a director level position open up, and I remember thinking, "Well, how come you're not going for this?" And he says, "Jeremy, I can do my job inside and out, backwards, hands tied, blindfolded. I love it. I love working with the customers. There's no way I want to work with people." He did not want to be a people manager, but was a phenomenal individual contributor. And I wonder, just tossing this out there, I wonder if companies need to do a better job of making that be okay. Like,
Yeah.
you can grow, you can get certifications, you can get raises, hopefully at least keeping up with inflation. And you're not stagnant just because you don't want to be a people manager. I wonder how collectively we make that be okay.
Well,
I think
I'll give a good example. When, all three of us came from Pearson, and when Chris and I were at the Pearson E-College, organization, we had strong leadership that decided, okay, our brilliant IT folks will now become principal technologists, a principal architect, and they don't have to have people reporting to them in order for us to promote them from a compensation perspective, and a responsibility perspective. So I've used that for, the last, I don't know, 20 years now as an example of this is how it could work if you really put your effort. But sometimes out of, I'll say, conformity or laziness, organizations don't want to do it because it would upset the apple cart. And that's not how we do it. But again, I think those examples far outweigh where people can be very successful.
No, I think it's a great point in that same kind of career path. Back when I started in that group, when it was customer success management, there was a customer success manager and a manager. Like, those were your two choices. You were either an individual contributor or you were a manager. And to give credit to that leadership at the time, they kind of accordioned that out and ended up adding 3 stair steps in so that you could still have some upward mobility without having to be a people manager, right? And I think that goes into companies rethinking, reimagining, being brave, not just doing things because that's how we've always done it, right? Sometimes you got to rethink that and give people different opportunities. So I think to wrap this up, and Jeremy, you kind of led us right to it, which is perfect. Since this is kind of a multi-generational podcast, what considerations should we be thinking about when you're being promoted, you're promoting, you're in management, when you're engaging with a multi-generational workforce? Red, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so for me, I always try to understand what the drives of both my employees are and my supervisors, as we've talked about. There are certain generational trends that you may find that we've discussed that will help you kind of identify that, as well as Mark has said, with being open and talking to your manager about getting a possible promotion, or, hey, I want to get an additional certification or a degree, or this is where I see myself in 3 years. What do you think? But, with that, you want to make sure that you also align with where you're going and the drives of kind of that department, referencing back to not taking a promotion just because. Make sure that it's the right move for you. Yeah, and all of that, I think, will help you move in a better direction, I'd say.
Yeah, that's a good point. Jeremy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would echo the just don't make assumptions about people, right? You can't assume everybody wants to be a manager. You can't assume everybody wants to be in the same role that they're in today 5 years from now.
Right.
I think I mentioned highlight of my career, hands down, has been the ability to have been a people manager, right? Manager, director, department head. I absolutely love it. But, in 10 years, who knows? Maybe I'm burnt out of that role and I want to go back to working with clients and customers out in the field again. I think that's one of the mistakes that is made collectively across businesses. While you've been a VP, you've been a senior VP, you've been a director, you can't go back to being an individual contributor.
Right.
And I think we're missing out. Like, oh my God, if Rhett came to me tomorrow and said, "Hey, Jeremy, I want to be able to focus on X, Y, and Z. I want to work with customers again. I've had it up to here with all the bureaucracy at the exec level. I would jump all over that. Like, hey, I can probably only pay you X. Is that okay? Like, let's set some expectations. But, you know, I really wish we could leverage, since this is multi-generational. If I got somebody that was in their 50s or in their 60s or in their 40s that said, hey, I had my shot. I like being in a leadership or a management position, but I just don't want to do it anymore. I would grab that person in a heartbeat. So I don't know. That's my 2 cents. I'm throwing that out there because I'm seeing a lot of that in the job search stuff today. People saying they're telling me I'm overqualified. How do I get back into a role? So I just thought I'd park that out there for consideration.
No, I think it's fair, because I think one of the assumptions is you're using it as a placeholder to get to the next thing. Like, you're not going to stay long because you're taking a step back. And again, I think you both touched on it, is really not making those assumptions, right? You've really got to think about what people's motivations are, and don't read that book by its cover. Somebody who's a little more seasoned and has been in that same job for 10 years knows where everybody is buried, knows every leadership change, knows everything. They could be a huge asset for you. Don't assume that they're lazy or unmotivated. And conversely, if you've got, a young person who's moving up quickly, don't assume that they don't know what they're doing. We've seen both ends of those spectrums. Like we talked about earlier, seniority does not mean that they know better, and, vice versa. Sometimes just having the merit doesn't mean they're going to be a great manager, like Mark said. So I think those are all good points. But, as you move into these roles, you are going to be dealing with different groups of people who expect different things. Just being aware really helps make sure you're getting the people into the right positions. Mark, anything to tie us off with there?
I think just the last point is, as we talked about last week, take all of these as a learning opportunity and move forward with appreciation with the lessons that you learn, versus being regretful or saying, well, they don't value me. On one hand, you want to be patient, but at the same time, with your internal board of directors at your side, if you don't think you're going to make an impact at a company where you want to, then it is time to kind of look forward and, continue to move on.
No, I think that's right. All right. So we've gone through a lot today. This was another jam-packed, information-heavy podcast. There's some really great takeaways here, but just to kind of reiterate, our talking points are: look at it as a career, not a job. Make sure you're tracking your wins. Play the long game. Show, don't tell. Be self-motivated. Be a team player, and help lift the load. And then on the other side of that, don't assume silence speaks volumes. Have confidence, not arrogance. Focus on value, not on feelings. Also focus on merit, not on tenure. And make sure it's the right fit, not just upward movement. So that's our podcast. Thank you all for listening. Thank you guys for always providing your insight. This is always great. I always feel like I learned something on these podcasts, so hopefully everybody does too. Any closing remarks to wind us up, guys?
No, I think what I'd say is just I love the little conversations that come up in between here, right? Like Jeremy's saying, boy, like, what is that challenge that hiring manager out there is facing? How do I get this position paid $90,000 when I'm being quoted at 60? I got to find that data point or that value add or whatever it is to prove it to my business. And I'm looking forward to getting into those conversations and how those kind of relate to our promotion conversation, right? So
yeah. No, there's a lot. I think if you get to go back and, listen to this, there's going to be a lot of kernels of information. But that's it for today's episode. Thank you for joining us, as always, on the Generational Exchange. We hope the conversation between the generations sparked some new ideas and helped you see the business world from fresh perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe for more insightful discussions across the generations. And if you have a burning question, as always, make sure to leave us a comment or shoot us an email at cmsrconsulting@gmail.com. Until next week, from all of us here at the Generational Exchange, thanks for listening and happy learning.